Hi, this is Tal Bowen, and I'm giving a presentation on differentiated instruction. Differentiated instruction is a theory that is grounded in the following principles: that every child can learn, that every child has the right to a suitable education, that progress comes in many forms and will be recognized and rewarded in many ways, and that the needs of the class as a whole and the individual students within it are different. With these principles, teachers are able to design instruction and learn from their instruction. Differentiated instruction embraces diversity. Students are given the supports that they need to succeed. They are not in the background or subtle supports, but they are known to the class and celebrated because there's an element of choice within differentiated instruction in most cases. This communicates respect. In designing differentiated instruction, you are communicating to your students that you are working with them to help them succeed. It is a collaborative partnership and not a one-way delivery of information in a one-size-fits-all manner. You're taking whatever steps are necessary to make ideas clear to your students. This collaboration occurs because students assume responsibility for their learning through opportunities for student choice and self-assessment. Student participation is required for the success of themselves and the classroom community. Teachers need engaged students for their differentiated instruction to work, and students need to be engaged for their own success and that of their partners. I think of this most clearly through the principle, every student can learn and every teacher can learn. This learning happens in collaboration within a learning community. We are going to dive into the ways that you can differentiate instruction. This can be done through grouping based on readiness or ability level, learning profile, including multiple intelligences and learning style, and interest. You can collect this data through student surveys. You can also differentiate based on the content. Doing this, it's important to emphasize key points with the whole group first. Then, during small group work, you may differentiate the subtopics. For example, the class might be learning about physical and chemical changes, but one group is working on demonstrating a chemical change, and the other group is working on a physical change. It's also possible to differentiate here based on readiness by compacting the curriculum and offering extensions for students who demonstrate mastery. One excellent way to differentiate content is by using varied supplementary materials. For example, a textbook reading for gifted students and a guided reading worksheet for students who need reading support. There are several learning activities that can differentiate the process of how students learn, again based on their interest, readiness, or learning profile. You might use cubes that ask a range of higher order thinking questions, graphic organizers or other graphic note-taking for visual learners, interpersonal dialogue like Think, Pair, Share, or learning centers that involve different experiences based on learning profile. During the small group work, it is important to offer individualized instruction to clarify concepts, assess students, and challenge their thinking. You may also differentiate the product that demonstrates a student's learning. These differentiated products can be used as a meaningful assessment tool. To design a product-based assignment, you must first identify the knowledge and skills that should be demonstrated, determine the range of acceptable formats. Some could be a multimedia presentation, a written essay, a museum exhibit, a musical or play. Then design a rubric that outlines the expectations for the work. Be sure to use language the students will understand so that they have a clear sense of how and on what they will be assessed. Once students have an understanding of the parameters of the project, they can assume responsibility to create a work that's representative of their understanding. We're going to talk about some strategies that you can use when differentiating instruction for an inclusive classroom. To be successful, you must use a range of instructional techniques. Be clear in your expectations for work and behavior, and understand who you're teaching, the strengths and needs of each student. Always embrace multiple forms of representation. Allow students to draw, write, or speak to demonstrate their understanding on assessments. Allow them to use alternative note-taking methods such as the app Doodle Buddy on an iPad, or have students write songs to memorize key concepts. Make sure that all students know and use their best form of multiple intelligence and learning style through student surveys conducted at the beginning of each year. When designing differentiated instruction in an inclusive classroom, it is essential that you know your students' IEP goals. Include data tracking for their benchmarks within each lesson. Design aspects of the lesson that allow for functional curricular goals that focus on community membership and interpersonal skills for students who have functional curriculum. For example, a student who is reading on a first grade level and has Down syndrome can be a teacher assistant during your fourth grade science lesson. For students with GIEPs, plan extensions and compacting opportunities so that they can access the depth and complexity that they crave. Know your students' needs and strengths and include them in your lesson. In this moment, there is an abundance of technology that can be used to support differentiated instruction. You could record mini lessons to be used during learning centers, use video journals as a means of self-reflection, use tactile-based note-taking like Doodle Buddy or Poplet. You can capitalize on the wealth of information that's available to differentiate both the content and the complexity of your resources. Our students live in a media-heavy world, and we must use the technology that exists to support our students and help them go further. You may differentiate groups based on ability, learning profile, or interest. You may further differentiate within each group to provide supports for individual students. For example, a student with a reading disability might require guided reading notes for all reading assignments. During a textbook reading assignment within the small group, you might make guided reading notes for them to follow along. At the same time, you might borrow a middle school textbook on the same concept to give to your gifted fourth grader who craves complexity. These students might be receiving individualized resources, but they can participate in the group discussion or summary making session that occurs after the reading. I'm going to talk about Universal Design for Learning, a style of lesson planning that comes from architectural principles. The focus of UDL is to provide accessible instruction in terms of engagement, how the information is represented, and how the students can demonstrate their learning. To plan a UDL lesson, first consider the needs of your students, and next think of the barriers that might come up. Example, a student might need immediate feedback when working. Next, you would design your lesson and then adjust the lesson by adding solutions for some of the barriers to learning. In our example, this student might need self-check materials to use during independent practice. When thinking about the barriers to learning, it's important to have your solutions already set up before teaching the lesson in order to set the students up for success and make the learning accessible for all students with different varying needs. Some resources for UDL are the Center for Applied Special Technology, the National Center on Universal Design for Learning, which actually operates out of the CAST system, and the Center for Universal Design. We are going to talk about some ways to support students' social and emotional and behavioral well-being. Social skills should be embedded through meaningful interactions with peers, ideally during small group work. In order to have successful groups, it can be helpful to identify roles for each student to play during the group. For example, within a lab, it might be useful to have a student be the timer, the note taker, the observer, and the photographer or the documentarian. You can have students self-identify which role they would like, or you can pre-assign depending on the needs of your class. It's also essential that you teach students how to have academic conversations with each other, how they can agree and disagree amicably and support their arguments with facts. This skill needs to be taught directly before any group work happens. You might want to post sentence starters throughout your classroom to help students state their opinions and back them up with supports. You might want to model this for the first few weeks of class. You also might want to model for them how group work functions in the real world, perhaps through your teaching team or by inviting a parent of one of your students to talk about how they collaborate within their job. There are several ways to monitor behavior at the class-wide level. A good reminder is to always state your expectations before an activity. I like to say, our learning center time should look like all students participating in the center, maintaining eye contact, and appropriately using materials. And it should sound like quiet conversations and I agree, disagree, because statements. You might ask students what it will look like and sound like to check for understanding. It's sometimes helpful to use a positive reinforcement toy like an apple, a plastic apple that I silently place on the desk of a student who's doing exemplary work or behavior. The apple might stay there for a period or maybe less before I pass it on to another student who I notice is doing well. A third strategy is to have a red, yellow, green system for each student. To make a chart like this, use a poster with clear pockets, like the one that's used for a calendar in many elementary classes, and have one labeled pocket for each student, and a space next to each name with 3 cards, one red, yellow, and green. Again, you do not need to verbally redirect or reprimand a student who's off task, but simply switch their card from green to yellow to red, etc. You can collect the data at the end of each lesson by taking a picture or making tallies in your log. Whatever tracker system will work for you. To support positive behavior in the classroom, a token economy can often be successful. Many schools have a similar school-wide token economy that use rewards dollars that can be used at the school store. I also like the idea of using time banking of any unused or unneeded time that can be banked and used towards a class-wide game or recess at the end of each week. A great website that's full of class-wide and more individualized resources is pbisworld.com. There's tons of information on there that follows a positive behavior supports model. Lastly, here are my references that I mentioned in my presentation. Thank you so much.